I'm just trying to help. Don't hate me because I talked down on the player you like. Last week, our sell high candidates, Rachaad White, looking at the underlying usage from Bucky Irving, plus the potential of a three-man committee with Sean Tucker. It was a very clear spot to sell Rachaad White coming off of back-to-back monstrous performances where people were thinking the receiving volume was going to save him because of the Godwin and Evans injuries. This past week, obviously, very down performance against the Kansas City Chiefs. From what I've seen in the live stream, seems like people are a lot more reasonable with Rachaad White going into the future. And probably if you didn't sell him last week, you're rolling with them from here on out. Now, Tucker Kraft was a clear sell high candidate because of the unsustainable touchdown rate that you had in Green Bay, plus the additional wide receivers that you had spreading the target share out to everybody in this offense. Now, of course, Tucker Kraft didn't have a horrible week against the Lions, but at the same time, the touchdown wasn't there. Seems like a lot of people are reasonable with Kraft now, expecting low-end tight end one production rather than mid tight end one production. So if you didn't sell, probably you're just holding him onto your roster. Now, Tyrone Tracy was a very clear sell high candidate for us, coming off of the monstrous game in a primetime spot against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where you could have sold as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2. This week, Tracy obviously takes a big-time step backwards. And honestly, I think that Tracy is probably appropriately valued now as a running back too, that you're starting every week based off of volume. But at the same time, you have realistic expectations that it is a garbage offense. And when you don't have a massive receiving role and you are in a garbage offense, your ceiling is going to be capped for fantasy football purposes. Do you want to reiterate? Tracy should be an RB2. Just definitely want to point out the limitations that you have with this offense. So it was an easy spot to call him a sell-high candidate coming off the Pittsburgh game. Also thought he was going to miss time with the concussion. But nonetheless, now you're probably holding on to him after the down performance. The other guys that we were calling sell-high candidates, Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir, viewing them more so as depth potential flex plays during a bye week rather than must-start options. This past week, obviously get the Keon injury, so things are a little bit murky here in Buffalo. I actually think if Keon and Amari were to miss this week, Shakir is kind of a must-start player. Raheem Mostert was a very easy sell-high candidate last week, coming off the 2-touchdown performance. Looking at the underlying usage that you had with Devon Achane, just understanding that if the touchdowns aren't there, Mostert's going to have nothing as a receiver, so you're not really ever going to be able to put this guy into your starting lineup, and he's just a handcuff back if Achane were to go down. Obviously, very down performance for Mostert against Buffalo. And at this point, I don't think you could sell him for anything. So probably leaving as is. And then the last sell high candidate, we are looking at Flowers with the expectations that Deontay Johnson comes in. And Deontay is never the wide receiver one here, but he spreads out the target share just a bit. And in a rush first offense, Zay Flowers may move from being that locked and loaded wide receiver 2 down to just a flex consideration play every single week. Well, this past week, Zay Flowers absolutely blows the hell up. Obviously, the Ravens score more points than any other team in the NFL, and Flowers looks phenomenal. I will stand by if you could get some great price tag for Flowers. I'm not going to mind going through and seeing you throw him on the trade block, but definitely not looking good if you sold him last week, which I apologize for. But hell, I'll take 5 for 6. Now, expectations for Flowers going into the future. You actually have his underdog pick already out for Thursday night. Higher, lower, 16.5 receiving yards. What's actually crazy is Deontay Johnson's only higher, lower, 20.5 receiving yards. So projections right now say that Deontay is going to have zero impact whatsoever. I'm actually staying away from both those picks, though. I'm going to be looking at Lamar Jackson go higher than 1.5 passing touchdowns. Fair warning, I'm like 1 for 2,086 on my underdog calls this season. But if for whatever reason you're crazy enough to tell me, you can find that link in the description or comment section. Code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting a free Lamar Jackson pick, more than less than half a total yard for Thursday night. And you're going to be getting a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night as well. Now, let's go to the guys that I'm looking to sell this week. First player is actually on my own team, and I already threw him on the trade block in the Flock League. I am trying to sell DeAndre Swift. Now, obviously, Khalil Herbert was just dealt. And I've seen some people thinking that Khalil Herbert getting traded has any impact here on Swift. And the reality is it doesn't. Khalil Herbert was seeing zero usage in Chicago. Really, I mean, the Chicago backfield's the same exact distribution of touches now as it was before Khalil Herbert was dealt. where Roschon Johnson's the third down back. DeAndre Swift's going to see the vast majority of touches, and DeAndre Swift should also see receiving usage out of the backfield, even if it doesn't come on third down, but he should get that on first and second. And with DeAndre Swift, you've consistently seen him come through and give you 20 plus opportunities almost every single week. I mean, this past week, you get 22, the week prior, 18, then 21, 23, 23, 17, 19, 10. So, I mean, obviously, he's been much better in the second half of the season. Over the past 5 weeks, DeAndre Swift is averaging about 20 points per game. DeAndre Swift has been an RB1. Now, if you look at where we have him in our rest of season ranks over on flogfantasy.com, we are currently sitting with DeAndre Swift at about RB20. I have him as a mid running back too, in the same range as J.K. Dobbins, James Conner, and Aaron Jones. And a big reason for this is the matchups that you have in the future for DeAndre Swift, where if we were going to go through and look at what this Bears schedule turns into, not necessarily this week, not even next week, but 3 weeks from now, where your trade deadline's probably already passed, so you're probably going to have to make a move now if you want to. You have the toughest slate of games for any running back in fantasy football. You have to go up against the Minnesota Vikings, brutal spot for RBs. You have to go up against the Detroit Lions, brutal spot for RBs. You have to go up against the Niners, brutal spot for running backs. You then have to go up against the Vikings again, RIP. Then you have to go up against the Detroit Lions. And obviously the Lions is a matchup against opposing wide receivers. You're not that scared, but for running backs, you are. So with Swift here, he's had a really good stretch of games. Khalil Herbert getting dealt, I think maybe makes somebody in your league a little more excited to trade for him. So I am doing everything that I can to get rid of DeAndre Swift in the Flock League. Obviously, I'm not giving away for just anything. If we go over to the trade finder that's on the site, we can see some trades that have been made with DeAndre Swift as of late. Somebody traded DeAndre Swift and Darnell Mooney for Jonathan Taylor. Give me Jonathan Taylor there. Somebody traded DeAndre Swift for Deebo Samuel. I'll take Deebo. Somebody traded Swift and DJ Moore for AJ Brown. I think if you're a playoff team and you can look for the long-term upside with Brown, makes a ton of sense. And then somebody traded Tracy Swift and Darnell Mooney for Devon Achane, where it's always funny that you're able to package together a couple of the mid players and get up to that elite asset. So all those, in my mind, absolute no-brainer DeAndre Swift deals. Now going over to our next sell high candidate, he's actually been a sell high for us earlier in the season. Obviously, it was a sell high after week 1 with the massive 33-point performance. I think we had has a sell high again around week 4 or 5. But we are going to have Jaden Reed. And with Reed, it will be simple with this because nothing really has changed here. Jaden Reed still remains to be that wide receiver that's in Green Bay, a great offense where you should have a ton of production. And he is the most efficient wide receiver in this offense. He is the number 1 wide receiver when it comes to fantasy points. But realistically speaking, trying to expect him to go through and provide you with a ton of consistency is just going to be a little unrealistic here. Because if you are looking at Jaden Reed in the underlying target volume that you've had in Green Bay, I mean, you can go week by week. We've seen 6, 2, 6, 8, 6, 6, 4, 3, 6 targets. Jaden Reed's averaging about 5 targets a game. Now, obviously, you had a couple games in there with Malik Willis. Obviously, Jaden Reed's still the wide receiver 10 so far this season in total fantasy points. But when you're actually submitting a starting lineup weekly, we understand that the easy thing to do is to look at the guy getting 9, 10 targets a game, go, okay, yeah, I can comfortably project him out to have a floor, whereas Reed doesn't give you that floor. You have 3 games under 10 fantasy points this season. If you're looking at Reed in my rest of season ranks, I just have him as a mid wide receiver 2. I have him right behind guys like Brian Thomas, DK Metcalf, Mike Evans. I know you get the 113 receiving yard game this past week, but still it doesn't really change anything for me. Looking at some of the trades that we can see with the trade finder on the site, you see Jaden Reed, Jalen Hurts get traded for Jaden Daniels, Jonathan Taylor. Hurts to Daniels, slight downgrade, lateral move. Reed to Taylor, massive upgrade. We see Jaden Reed and Rico Gathers get traded for Alexander Madison and Garrett Wilson. Alexander Madison's an absolute 0, but going and getting Garrett Wilson at this price makes a ton of sense. We will have Dowdle as the sell-high candidate in a bit. Jaden Reed for Mike Evans, if you're a playoff team, makes a ton of sense. Jaden Reed, Devonta Smith for Deebo Samuel and Puka Nacua. Going from Reed to Deebo, I'd honestly rather have Deebo. And going from Smith to Puka, I'd rather have Puka as well. But moving over to Rico Dowdle, I hate to throw Dowdle as a sell high candidate because we just had him as a buy low candidate about 2 or 3 weeks ago. This was when you had the horrendous game against the Detroit Lions where it appeared that all hope was lost. You did have Dalvin Cook coming up to the active roster. People, blah, 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 blah. Now, Rico Dowdle's coming off a phenomenal performance. Rico Dowdle's coming off a game with 21 fantasy points, setting his career high in total fantasy points, his career high in targets, his career high in receptions, his career high in receiving yards as well. But just realistically, projecting this into the future, it will be a very difficult spot now that you have the Dak Prescott injury. You're already seeing this week the expectations dramatically change in this offense for Dallas, where what we had in the past is typically every single week, you'd have an implied team total of 23, 24, 25 points for this Dallas Cowboys offense. Whereas this week, going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, you actually see that you had the Dallas Cowboys with an implied team total of 17 points. Now, very similar to what we talked about as soon as Tua went down with how HN's expectations needed to dramatically change when the offense was going to be significantly worse. The same thing here happens for Rico Dowdle. And Dak Prescott's on the IR. Dak Prescott's missing at least 4 games here. So despite the career high best game for Dowdle, despite him being the 3-down running back, seeing every single snap here with Ezekiel Elliott benched due to disciplinary issues, I have Dowdle down as an RB3 rest of season. I have him behind guys like Ramondre, Tracy, Najee. Looking at some of the trades that have been made with the trade finder, you see Dowdle and McLaurin for Tyreek Hill, Dowdle and Judy for Drake London, Dowdle for DK Metcalf. And then lastly, I just had to throw this on there because it's always funny to see one of these 4-for-1 deals where someone just takes all the pieces on their bench and somehow comes away with the stud. Like Dowdle, Ramondre, Wandale, Pacheco for Kamara. Hilarious. Now, our next option is going to be Mr. Tank Dell. Looking at Dell, we'll be very brief. You get the 9 targets this past week, right? You get the 18 fantasy points. This is right up there for his season high. He looks great. It's a primetime game. It was an easy matchup going up against the Jets. And this has a lot of people thinking that Dell is a must-start wide receiver going into the future. Saw a lot of people get upset when I believe we ranked him around wide receiver 30 right after that game. And my thing is, we've already seen this situation in Houston. We've already seen Tank Dell get to play in an offense that was missing one of the top wide receivers in it. Now, obviously, that was Nico Collins. It wasn't particularly Stephon Diggs, where we can go through and we can look at over the past 5 weeks for Tank Dell, where obviously Nico Collins goes down, then he misses 4 games with the IR stint. But in those games, including the one in which Nico went down, you had 4 targets, 9 targets, 4 targets, 4 targets. And then now that you had no Nico and no Diggs, you get back to the 9 targets. But realistically speaking, with no Collins and with Diggs playing in this offense, Tank Dell was only sitting here averaging about 5-6 targets a game. With Dell, this is that tiny wide receiver. We talked about this all offseason on why I preferred drafting Stephon Diggs over Dell's, looking at the fact that he's a massive, massive outlier with his size. And if he is going to find consistent fantasy success, you probably need to see the volume be there. And in my mind, I think that you are just expecting that Nico Collins is the straight up alpha. So if you could package together like 2 mid wide receivers, such as like Dell, Josh Downs to get to Mike Evans, I would like it. If you could sell Dell and Javante for McBride, I'd really like that as well. I actually just sold Javante in the Flock League. We have him as a sell-high candidate in this video. We'll talk about it in a second. David Njoku, Dell for DK Metcalf. Give me Metcalf. We actually just bought DK Metcalf. And Dell, Flowers for Puka Nacua as well. But yeah, essentially if you can take 2 of those wide receiver 2/flex prototypes and get up to that wide receiver 1, I would love to. Dell right now is wide receiver 29 in my rest of season ranks, right in the same range as players like Olave, DJ Moore, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Now, the number 1 sell high candidate for us here is going to be Javante Williams. If you're looking at Javante, typically this is the exact opposite of a player that I'd look to sell. This is a running back that has had so many opportunities, both as a rusher and a receiver, and he's kind of gotten unlucky with touchdowns. Where if you're going to go through and look at this, just opportunities by week, starting from the most recent to oldest, you've seen 15, 22, 17, 12, 19, 19, and we don't need to go through the first 3 weeks, but you're getting anywhere from about the 15 to 19 opportunities a game, and a lot of those are coming in the form of targets. You're seeing about 4 to 5 targets per contest. But again, I do want to reiterate, we talked about this as soon as the Carolina game ended. The Denver Broncos had the benefit of seeing those really strong matchups back-to-back in week 7 and 8. That got a lot of people excited about Bo Nix. They got a lot of people excited about this Broncos offense in general. And realistically, it was just a phenomenal setup. You had a game on Thursday night against the Saints in which nobody was healthy for the Saints. You had a game against the Carolina Panthers. And now the report drops today as well that Audric Estime is actually going to be seeing an increased workload going into the future. So for me, I have Javante Williams just as like a mid RB3 rest of season in the same range as like Dowdle, Pacheco, Rachaad White. Again, if we could sell Javante and Dell for McBride, I would do it. If you could sell Higgins, Javante for Metcalf, I'd do it. If you could sell Javante Downs for Debo, I'd do it. We can throw up the trade that I made with Sal in the Flock League on the screen as well. I don't remember the exact details of it, but effectively I went through and tried to package together options that were on my bench that week, such as Ladd, Javante, Eckler, and go after an option like Metcalf and Najee for the long term. But I think that's all I got for you. Again, I do want to reiterate, if you wanted to tail us on the underdog pick, Lamar Jackson to have higher than 1.5 passing touchdowns, you can find that link both in the description and comment section. Code FLOCK will get you hooked up with a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting a free Lamar Jackson pick, more than less than half a total yard, and a free team review in the live stream we're doing every single night. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy. That way we're able to credit you with that free team review voucher. But thank you again. I really appreciate you and really hope we're able to see you out in the live stream later tonight.